on Saturday night and there wasn't a restaurant.
So we'll call this meeting to order. Good morning.
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 Commissioner Rexroth,
Present.
Commissioner Wessel,
Here.
Commissioner Lautner.
Present.
We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the next agenda item is the election of a chairman. So I'll take a motion from
I
Mr.
move
Wessel.
that we elect Doug Rexroth as chair.
Support.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 And those against? No. Mr. Chairman Rexroth, you may now take over.
So, approval of the agenda. Are there any late additions or deletions?
I would move the agenda be approved as submitted.
Support.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carried 3-0. This time we'd entertain public comment, 3 minutes. Don't see any public comment. So, we'll go on to the action items. Finance Committee, Finance Department visions to start with. And I think, Mr. Cohen, I'd ask you to lead us through your vision here a little bit, okay? Please.
Sure. Jen, is this the meeting that you can't hear him?
No, I should be fine because we're not on Zoom.
Okay. We just have to realize in which meetings we can hear the people at this table and which meetings we cannot when they're putting the minutes together.
Yes.
Using the audio. So it depends on how it's recorded.
Oop.
And so as long as you're good.
Interesting.
I guess I forgot Commissioner comment, but no one spoke up, so, okay.
I only had to thank you very much for taking over chairman. Really, that's all I had, so.
Go.
So, I guess to me, this a little bit is trying to figure out the right tone, the right cadence to get what you want as well. So please guide it. Ty had asked me to give a little bit of thought as we were planning for this, both for I'm more comfortable coming from the perspective of the finance department with some thoughts, but I think it's appropriate in context to think about what the committee is from your perspective. And so without getting all legalese, and I use the word vision more than charter, so I'm trying to stay out of any deep water. I threw down on that very first page, I guess, just my thoughts on what the vision would be around the finance committee. And so the words I kept coming back to in my head was thinking that, being specific, I've heard the concern about as we move into a committee structure, what it is and what it isn't. I'm hoping that there's a thought of oversight in support of the board on key financial systems and processes supporting our county. But to me, the value is my second bullet, which is hopefully this is a chance for discussion, especially around things that I would consider challenges, priorities, and the focus of the finance department. There's a lot of value in that to me that I'm hoping to get out of it. From time to time, we'll have proposals recognizing what this isn't, which is any kind of a decisioning body, but maybe a chance to have some dialogue around escalation and maybe presentation of things that later go to a full board. Again, trying to be specific around It's not a decision-making forum. I understand it's not intended to replace meaningful dialogue at the full board level, and it's not intended to replace the management function. So I think just recognizing all of those items. So as I was thinking, that's what came to my mind. It was a little bit awkward, honestly, because I'm writing that from the perspective of the board, which I think is yours. So I threw those down just to spark dialogue, but I didn't know if there was a reaction.
Any comments? Linda?
The only comment I have is because our committee of the whole is now the full board, I just want to make sure that we follow the process of that our recommendations will go to executive. And same with personnel. Because I will know what comes out of our committee. So if it went to full board, that wouldn't be a big deal because I would know, but nobody else would. And same with personnel. I won't know what comes out of personnel. So I would want that week to digest that. So, and same with personnel. I mean, as long as we follow that structure.
Commissioner Wessel?
I agree, and I like the last paragraph, and I hope that last paragraph that we have here is also on the personnel committee, because it really does not take away the authority of the board, and we don't want the board to be surprised by recommendations that haven't been talked about at the board level.
And I guess that's, following up on that, that was kind of the personnel committee we haven't changed our personnel management structure in the same way we've changed our finance structure. I mean, my understanding is that human resources still falls, I don't know that we made any decision that changed our hierarchy there. Whereas in this one, we made a major change in having 2 direct reports. So, and I agree wholeheartedly with Commissioner Lautner's remark that getting these recommendations, especially this can't come Sunday night, Friday afternoon before a full board meeting. It has to be in time before the executive meeting to have people digest it, to actually make sure that we are fulfilling the idea that this is not a decision-making committee. If we don't give people enough time, it'll look that way, right? So, and I appreciate your big thoughts on the committee vision objectives, and I assume some of this will kind of gel over time, but we really kind of need to know a little bit of what you're looking for, because we're both in new territory here a little bit, so. Any other comments?
Yeah, I think I like that. I mean, it could evolve, right?
Right. Obviously, I mean, we're all doing something new here, so it's going to take a lot. I think I read Commissioner Wessel's email to all of us, and I agree with his thoughts that this is going to take some time. We're just going to have to be patient, work together. The thing that can't change is our commitment to getting it done.
Keep going?
Yep.
Okay. I've realized some of this, I bounce back and forth in my own head from kind of what I would say is a top-down approach to what are we doing, and then sometimes I flip back to more of a bottom-up. And so there's probably flavors of both of those in the next few items. Let me start really high level top down because I wanted to write these down for myself. And again, I'm open to evolution and feedback on these items. But since I stepped in the door back in June, I would say the first thing around finance is what are we doing? And I've already realized that the words that I choose here have unintended consequences sometimes. And so I don't know what the right word is. I I've been using modernization more recently because I feel like there was an overarching desire to take processes, organization, so people, resources, technology, and let's see if we can think a little bit as we go forward. How do we want those to look when we get to some destination? And so I did get pushback on that word because it seems to imply that we're not modern or something's broken. And I'm open to what the word is, but I think there has to be a thought on where we're going, where we collectively want to go in order to get there. And so let me throw some of the things that I think are part of any organization's objectives around finance. I mean, I look at our group as collectively accounting and finance, if those are really separate. I'm sure they are. But we're here to provide the board and county departments, I believe, is the support necessary to make effective decisions. You know, and not more, not less than that. I guess is how I would declare ultimately success. Now, how you do that is where it gets into some discussion and some debate. I believe that we have had excellence in operational internal controls, and so when I think about modernization, the reason I throw that out is because I don't want there to be a confusion that priorities are changing. I think at the base of anything around finance or accounting, that is the basis. But the third bullet around sustainability, I think I'd love to just have some discussion about it because I think at least in my mind, sustainability starts to be based more on things other than subject matter experts and maybe other than organization structure that is in place. And so we've talked about this kind of on the side, but historically we were very person dependent. And the way we accomplished internal controls and everything that was produced from the finance organization is people. You know, in my world, I always come back to there's people, there's processes, there's technology, and the interplay between those three is critical. And I think what I believe the modernization mission starts to try to do is move from that dependence on key subject matter expertise to sustainable processes, regardless of the person in that seat. We ought to be able to be comfortable that there is not I win the lotto, I try to stay away from the hit from the bus kind of thing. But those events should be less impactful if we could get to dependence on process with supporting technology. So at the core, I guess, of what I'm thinking about modernization are those concepts and the interplay between them. Does that resonate, or can I get a reaction if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess before I start, with my fellow commissioners, I mean, this could be more of a discussion format. I don't think we need to have a formal call on people. That's what's happening here. So as you feel moved, and just respect the other people. I'll hop in for a second and just say, from my business expertise, it is critical that you rely on systems in place instead of, and even though you have excellent staff and excellent people, things can happen. And without this, that's my word for the same thing you're saying. I think we agree on the context. It's systems in place, processes that produce repeatable results and are predictable. And And not that that isn't being done right now, because we have excellent staff doing excellent work.
Right.
So I want to make sure that my comments don't reflect that, but I went, I went through some issues in my business where we had key staff that knew things, and it was like, oh my goodness, that person leaving or being sick for 2 months or 3 months left me with a massive hole, and the only solution to that is systems in place where someone else can come in with with less expertise, so.
No, I agree, and that is a real big problem. In fact, it's a problem or fear we've had here because so many of those, we've got the systems in place, but they're all here. And get them in print and have that same, cross-training comes to mind too, so that should somebody get sick or be out, that we can just continue that even flow of steady work. Yeah.
If I could interject, and realizing too that this restructure took a layered potential six levels of people into two. I mean, that's huge. You had 6 people in the previous administration that had access to the written down instructions, had access to the training of the staff, and we would utilize more bodies. So there was backup. You are vulnerable right now. You have a vulnerable situation because you don't have enough bodies.
I would also encourage the treasurer if he has
Yes,
comments.
agreed
along
at
the
any
way.
time. This is more of an open, relaxed forum. We're trying to figure things out, so.
No, I agree with me and John's comments. I think we've had a centralized system for many years. It's been very productive. But in this new administration, a decentralized system is probably more appropriate. Better. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Nope, that's it.
I do think that what John was just describing was my attempt at number 5, and I'm just hoping to get feedback on this as well. And so there's a bunch of different words. John was using the centralized, decentralized, that I think is appropriate. I've heard the administrator, Deb talked about the vision shared with me up front was the desire to move to a state in the future where departments have clear responsibility, and that responsibility starts with accountability as well. And so, not to imply that those have not existed in the past, but I think just my observation has been that you can get comfortable with that, and that there's what happens in a very strong, centralized organization structure is not only do you develop strong subject matter experts in the center of that, but I think that the unintended consequence sometimes is when you're not in that center, it's almost like, yeah, they'll fix it, they'll catch it, that will be handled elsewhere. And so I believe that we're still on a path, but this is kind of core to a lot of things that we'll talk about after this point. So I wanted to make it part of the vision is, I believe we're developing a finance organization to support a bigger view on how county government operates, and specifically between the departments and support groups like finance. And so I think that following on that, that starts to lay out kind of how we operate and what tools would need to be in place. Because if you start to say, I want to hold the department accountable, It means we have to give them the tools, the transparency into what they're doing to enable that. And they kind of have to move in lockstep. And I think that where we sit today, just my assessment of the landscape is some of those things are possible, but they don't exist. And so we can talk about those specifically, but I think they come up where we're headed, like when we start to dig into some of the Raymond transition recommendations. So I don't know, again, the right words. I'm open to crafting a message that sticks together for all of the departments that make up our county government. But I view this as we need to be able to provide kind of a self-service capability in the tools and the processes that we work within to support a self-serve model where those departments have that accountability, but they're able to also execute. People,
Thoughts? No, Vaughn?
Yeah.
Agreed?
and again, to Commissioner Lochner's point, I expect this will evolve. You know, this is as good as me sitting in my office and kind of thinking about, well, there's no magic in these five, and if the words don't resonate, certainly from a branding perspective, I'll need to choose better ones. So if that is kind of the backdrop, back to the bottoms up or tops down, I was going to flip to kind of grinding through some of the Raymond recommendations and see where that leads us, because I think this gets down into the independent third-party look at operations, systems, people, process, technology today, and going to start low, but then kind of pull it back up. Does that make sense? So, and again, this is one where I think, to Commissioner Lochner's point, I'm choosing to do this here to get a reaction or your collective thoughts on it. I don't know that I don't want to imply that we don't need to do the same thing in a full board meeting. So that this isn't intended to replace that, but just as a point to start, I think. Because I believe the board's only had the opportunity to basically accept the report from Raymond. So what I did on pages 3 and 4, if we kind of take those together, is I went through the document, and I'll send out the full document after. I just didn't want to hit everybody with paper that you already have. But if you take that full Raymond report, I went next to every recommendation in that report, and I gave it a number. So when you get to the end of the day, there's something like 33 recommendations that are in that report that I wanted to make sure, get cataloged, inventoried, and we don't neglect. And so my process was just to put a simple description there, but I mean, on each one of those, you could go back to the full written body that was provided by Raymond. The other thing I took a shot at starting to do is what would be your process of deciding what to work on, when, and who? So when, kind of the old who, what, when, where are you going to address those things? And again, I really haven't had any, this is as good thinking as I can do without feedback and without committee. I guess my head goes to trying to quantify something around the dimensions that would answer that question, like what are you going to do and who's going to do it and what are you going to do first? And so I think there's a component of each one of those items, each of the 33 recommendations, that has a scale to it. Some of these things are really big, really big. Like, in my simpleton terms, like, they're gonna take more than a year. They're going to involve more than a single department. They're gonna involve processes that span departments. So if you think about it that way, I just put them on a simple dimension and started to say, I'd like to try to take a shot at scaling the change that's applied by the recommendation made by Raymond. Not scientific, totally judgmental, and it's as good as me sitting rating those myself. And I keep saying that because I think I would love to open this up, and the punchline at the end is I would love input from more than myself, because I don't think I'm the expert, especially as you start to get into some of these items that primarily sit today either in a dispersed way or they sit in the treasurer's office, for example. So there's a scale consideration. I think the other thing that that comes to my mind is a prioritization. And you have to start to get this, describe where you would place a priority. My head went to things like, if there's a critical control deficiency identified, by definition, that should be a high priority. There are other items that maybe the other end of that spectrum, that my take was, they're nice, you would agree that you would want to do that, but maybe it's not strategically critical. So again, I kind of rated things high, medium, and low from a priority standpoint. And what I was trying to get to is the thought then, those should lead to some thought around timing. Because I think what we need to start to do is, I gotta be honest, when you lay out 33 items here, it makes me a little queasy, because, and knowing that there's multiple years of work here, and knowing the context of today is, we're pretty much fully engaged as a team, as we start. We don't have idle hands. We're involved in the normal management of accounting within the county is a full-time task for the current team. But you got to start somewhere. So I guess I believe that timing is driven by the scale, but it also needs to consider there are some things that start to become, there's a dependency. It's like a sequence has to happen. For me to do one thing, it's dependent on another. And so that starts to make the argument, at least in my head, a little bit, that some of these things you can handle concurrently. And what do you think you can handle concurrently? And so where my thinking comes back to on that is things like, if it only involves a single department and a process that exists within a single department, and it's not huge scale, like it's not involving many months, to me, you could start to put a timing expectation around those things that may say, hey, if it's something happening in the treasurer's office today, it only affects the treasurer's office. In my simple terms, just do it, right? And just do it starts to lead to a shorter term timing expectation. Other things, you may want to just do it, but without a system and without software tools that we're providing, I'm going to assume that we're using the best that we have available today. That you're now stuck on step one is provide the tools necessary to hold them accountable for change, something like that. So That's what I was trying to do with this sheet. Yes.
I do have a question,
Yeah.
just to understand this better, because I've just been, as you're talking, working my way through it. Your timing, so, excuse me, say you've got, let's take page 1 of 1.
Mhm.
Okay, the budget, education, you've got Q4. Are you thinking, is that a 23?
Yeah.
So your Q4, your fourth quarter was 23, and then as we work through, so say purchasing policy, the one that starts at first quarter, that would be something you roughly around the first of the year in that first quarter. Is that how I'm reading this?
Yeah, that was the intention.
Okay. Okay. And obviously this could be a fluid, so.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. And then who kind of, let's just pick anything randomly, you know, like, let me switch to next quarter. Okay, accounts payable, vendor maintenance software. Obviously you got a question mark, but say, who would pull the plug on that or pull the trigger? So would that be yourself? You'd say, we're not ready. Let's push that to third quarter.
It's a good example. We could spend a minute on this one, Melinda, because I think it shows some of the examples. So to me, that one is, how that is done today is kind of offline. We're not using a formal piece of software. We're maintaining police spreadsheets on the side, a pay spreadsheet on the side. So the recommendation, if you go to the guts of the Raymond report, is actually to acquire software that has that capability integrated.
Okay.
And so this is my dependency example. Can't do that until we decide on what software, first of all, and then we're going to be challenged with the timing of an implementation of that software if we took their recommendation at its extreme. That one, when you come over, I was picking words to show your question of who. On that one, I hung that out under the responsibility of the CFO role and the accountability with the CFO role. So typically, I separate those things because the person accountable is actually the person who's going to. This is going to get really challenging. If there's 33 items and I work really hard and they're all under me, you're going to be disappointed in the timeline because there's more on here than a single person can get on
Right.
in a reasonable period of time.
Right.
And so what I was trying to start to do too is pull apart where there's an opportunity to leverage resources across the organization, experiences, skill sets that sit elsewhere to try to align these things. So that one has a good example of why I have the question mark in timing, the dependency that comes with that. I don't think that one is a scale. I guess it was in the middle. And so what I was looking at, if you look at my scale, what I call the 3 is something that requires a process change, but it's probably going to take 60 to 90 days. It also has a dependency, like we could put another dimension on this, which would be if it's dependent on something else. That 30, 60, 90 day kind of thing only starts to be applicable once that condition precedent or that thing that you're dependent on is in place. So I'm just swagging saying that's probably, not something we can start right now until we have the tools in place.
Excuse me, I like what you put together here, and my fear for the last several months has been that we're just going to think we can hire a CFO or a finance manager and we're all done. and I like your scale. Some stuff we can do right away, and we ought to do that. But I hope as we proceed that we're patient and we don't do things now that aren't as thoughtful as they ought to be. And that was my response, I think, on that Friday email that I sent out. We know we gotta make some changes, but let's go slowly and thoughtfully and make some steady but slow progress. And I like this format. I like this, the timetable. I like how we've rated things. I commend you.
I appreciate that. Again, it's as good as me sitting, you know, alone. And I have, John's staff has been great, giving some, you know, initial impressions. But I would love the chance to be able to go through it with all of the impacted groups, because I think collectively we could come to a better, if we're going to put something on the page that will serve as an overarching project plan, and if the project is addressing the Raymond recommendations, that's my thought. It's going to take a coordinated effort, it's going to take a distributed effort, and I think it's going to take, in addition to responsibilities, it's going to take routines. And let me give you my, I'll share this with some of you, but I would, well, there's a thing bigger than what's going on here that is part of county culture. And something I talked to Deb and John and others about that I think everybody's interested in getting after. And so I don't mean to lead the charge with this. It just happens to be, you know, right now, because it's Monday morning and it's the first one we talked about. But I think within culture, one of the things that's going to be critical in getting after this is it's breaking down the silos between the departments, but it's also just in how we work, in my opinion. How do we get flexible enough that we don't have to apologize if it's Tuesday on Wednesday? It's like, hey guys, new piece of information. Can we all sit down and just talk about what we got feedback from a vendor? We got feedback from one of the departments that they're having a hard time on something that's on this list that they're taking on. They need support from somewhere else. If they do something, something else breaks. To me, those are real-time events that are going to happen. And I think our culture in the past has been very rigid in terms of when we have meetings, the formality of those meetings, the times when sometimes it's like, hey, circle up. I'm trying to think through this process. I'm going to sit up here and I need you guys to help me. You play devil's advocate with me. Let me write down the steps. Breaking that down is something that if we're going to move something like this along at a pace that's reasonable within the daily work that happens here, that's hard, right? Because that means somebody has to leave a desk, somebody has to leave something that they weren't doing. But I think that flexibility, there's got to be somewhere in between that we don't. If what we do is we come away from that and go, we're going to have a meeting in 2 weeks and we're going to talk about that, that will be a challenge to keep things moving. So I do that today more by walking around. And that sounds terrible, but that's a terribly inefficient process, and I think it leads to, the reaction is that you didn't ask me in the order. This is the first time I'm hearing of that. Why did you start with somebody else? And I'd love to get past some of those things, but in order to get past some of those things, it requires everybody to be willing to kind of be also willing to operate and jump in the room and prioritize this overarching thing that we're talking about. with a response to something as broad as the Raymond report. So just a thought there. I don't think there's an answer to that one, but when people ask what you need, that's one of the things that I feel like would be helpful.
I think, back to your remarks, and this, in order to get this done, you'll need buy-in.
Yeah.
And I think that's, kind of an overarching way to describe what you're talking about. How do we get everyone to be part of the team and realize this is coming, and we're gonna do it, and we just have to do it all hands on deck to get it done. And seeking their advice and moving slowly when sometimes you recognize fast is too fast, and getting that buy-in through that process, I think, is going to be crucial to make this successful.
Keep going.
One quick question before you go on, because I don't want to spend too much time racking my brain for what is the SEFA, the SEFA?
That's our regulatory filing single.
It's a single expenditure of federal award. So anything
A
that you
federal
spend
grant.
over, everything that's a federal grant.
Thank you. Yeah, okay.
And to your point, Commissioner Lautner, the
Schedule.
intention, we could spend, and maybe we should spend time going through each of the 33. Let me jump forward, and then maybe we can come back in, because I'd like your thought on that. But if you go to the slide number 5, what I did on 5 was just more of a visual to try to show 3 and 4 granular detail. What I was trying to show on 5 is just if you back up a step and kind of look down at a little bit higher level. What are you saying? Where do these things start to kind of aggregate? So along those dimensions of scale of change and the priority of change, from low to high on priority, small to extensive on scale, I think that the additional piece that I'm throwing in here from a color scheme basis is where, to me, should be some discussion about how do we divide this thing up so that we can get some traction across departments. And so I added the additional dimension that kind of shows treasury, human resources, there's grant administration, there's general administration that goes on in here. And between those, I think what you can see, and this is to me, the little bit of the aha with this is the highest priority of change and the most extensive change starts with those things that start to sound like automation. And that's the theme, I believe, throughout the Raymond recommendations. So much comes back in the day that they presented. We went back to the record and how many things come back to that. And so let me share a thought with you, and this is probably the thing that gives me the most anxiety is if you ask me, like, what have you learned throughout the history of your life, your career, working career? Well, the one thing that just sticks with me around change is that if you try to automate something that is not that is not a stable process or a defined process, you are going to fail. You're gonna realize that there are things that were not understood at the right level of detail because the process wasn't written down. The process was constantly changing. Your target state where you're trying to build a process to doesn't exist yet, and you're guessing, and it's like things are moving. And when you try to go change, when you try to automate that, I've seen too many times projects fail, a lot of money gets spent and not get to its desired outcome. That's my own personal bias. The challenge here is that description. So now think about where we are. We acknowledge that, we have to acknowledge Raymond points out that many of our processes are are manual outside, done outside of systems. They're not integrated, they don't talk to each other. Each step is kind of a disconnected piece of a whole. It's been great. There's a team here that has patched all that together, but if we run towards automation, my fear is those processes are not defined. I think the challenge here is almost every piece of advice that I've gotten internally, externally, and when I say externally, other counties that I've talked to, vendors that I've talked to, have actually been encouraging me to think about this differently because of the pervasiveness of what we're trying to take on. And so the feedback has been, you really actually ought to think about this slightly different because if you don't make some selection from an automation standpoint, in this case, you're gonna chase your tail. And maybe the learning here is, I gotta be honest, I've worked for employers who have done a lot of, it always came from, we're big enough, we're gonna design our own thing, and we're gonna develop it internally. And in this case, I don't think that describes us. So I think that when we start to talk about automation and technology in this case, I think we're not going to develop it internally. We're going to want to look at something that's very canned, and that canned nature of it is going to help define the process. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit backward. It's taken me a while to even get comfortable saying that because it feels so, it feels a little bit scary to me.
So can I
Yeah.
ask you to understand where you're coming from? And I really appreciate you being so candid about that. So because we have all these different puzzle pieces we've been able to fit together, are they all up here or are they different softwares?
So that's a great question, Belinda. And if I want to bounce around. I wasn't sure what order where the conversation would go. But if you jump to slide 8. So what I've started to do, and let me first say, like big red up in the corner isn't big red enough. This isn't complete. But what I was starting to do was department to department. If you think about every one of those departments has a set of processes that make up their work is broken down into processes. Those processes are supported by tools, software, people. If you go department to department, you start to say, what do you do and where do you do it? That was really what slide 8 was supposed to be. I haven't had the chance to talk to every department head yet. I started with just kind of local knowledge, if you will. I had a chance to talk to a few folks like Amber and John's team, just because of availability and timing. But I think that the other thing I was able to gather, if you went back a couple of years, we actually used to produce a document that's super helpful, that's kind of like an inventory of all software in accounting. And it's the core of how we theoretically do allocations. I don't believe it's been updated in a while, but I went back to that too to just grab some of these items. But the point of it is kind of where your question was going, Commissioner Lautner, with how much of it is what sits where and what are they using. You'll see a bunch of manuals on here. You'll also see the fact that some departments have made a choice with technology, register of deeds. It's different than other areas have, where when you look at treasury, equalization, building safety, what you notice is there's a core of a railroad almost already starting there with BSNA as a software provider. But to your point, that's the start of the thing that's been in the back of my mind is what are we talking about ultimately? Like when you think about how do those things come together, almost, I'm going to say this and then people can point out where this is too much of a broad statement. It's not. There are examples where this does happen today differently. But in almost every case where there is a system-to-system translation needed, think of that as we could go lay that out on a big map, and every one of those is manual. So in every one of those steps, you are forcing somebody to. It's not as easy as export import in all those cases. It's like I get to the end of my process, I end up with something, I'm able to take that output, but usually through a manual process, and I'm going to walk down to the treasurer and I'm going to say, here's what I received today. And now there's a manual process on the other side to take that into whatever the next step in, an end-to-end process would start to look like, which is sometimes it's just as simple as processing cash. So where all of that leads me is that what we're talking about, when we look at the Raymond findings, I don't hear this as a new general ledger. I don't hear it as a new accounts payable. I don't hear it as a new payroll. I don't hear it as, I hear it as, as that end-to-end nature of processes that need to occur that do touch almost every department. I mean, every department has something related to accounts payable. They get an invoice. What do they do with it? How does that process start? Where's it end? Payroll. Every department in here processes the payment of our employees. Who does that? Why do they do that? Where's it touch? How's that end? And so when you start laying those out and you think about all of them collectively, to me that starts to become part of a broader set of rails that you want everybody to be, have access to, have transparency into, own part of, that we need to get after. And so that's why I've been more cautious to not call this evolution that we're wanting, feeling, that shows up all over the place in this process map, in this map that isn't all finance. How do we start to piece those things together?
And can they be pieced together?
And whenever we say that, to that point, not everything. I mean, it sounds so pie in the sky that it starts with, we ought to be able to, over here, submit something and over here, cash comes out. And it will never be that.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, like, I don't think that's an aspiration beyond my lifetime, but maybe our kids can solve. But we've got to start somewhere in choosing those rails, and what you want to prioritize, I believe, is kind of the crossroads that we're at. Before we run off and double down on another general ledger, on another accounts payable. You asked earlier, Commissioner Lautner, about just the simple inventory of vendors, vendor management kind of thing. How should that fit into the other pieces? So that's kind of where I believe that we are. I think there's still some work to do, but there are things in place to date that I've tried to think about, as I've walked around, that what are those, I don't want to say guardrails, but what are the things that are in place for a good reason that you'd be hesitant to think you really want to open the door on those? The most simple one that I think about related to county management in the state of Michigan is 83 out of 83 counties collect taxes using BSNA. 60 some out of 83 counties use BSNA. When you go one step backwards into the things that the logical next step of that tax processing, they use the modules or a module within what you would call the financial part of their software. And so what that starts to me to make the case for is, what is this thing that I call the ERP? It's just an industry slang for, if you go to slide 7, what is ERP? Enterprise Resource Planning. It has its roots in things like manufacturing, but really, Sarah Wagner helped me go do some research on this. Some like, am I using the term right or wrong? But just think about ERP as that core business process to run a company. And I'm using the word like common set of rails, but what are you going to hook all these things to if ultimately what you want to do is minimize the number of internal handoffs that are going to happen? And so that's where my head's been coming is, I know there's been a question, I think if it hasn't been on the table, it's on the table in the near future, which is, what is this thing that we're wanting? When we say automation over in our little picture here, what is it that we're looking to automate? Is it really the general ledger? Or is what we're looking for is this kind of end-to-end vision where we can start to establish a frame where hopefully over time we start to minimize the number of manual processes that are caused by disconnects between those systems. That makes sense?
Yep.
So one other thing that I did, and again, like, when I get a free moment or two, I've either made phone calls or made a physical trip to some of our neighboring counties. And if you look at slide 9, I've got kind of full reports behind this, which I'm more than willing to share. But just while we're on the theme, and I wasn't sure if we would even get here today, but I appreciate the question, so just bring it for all it's worth. On slide 9 are some of the findings from our peer counties when I asked some questions. And so what you see is one of the dozen or so questions that I asked each county, which was, what's the relative importance of the overall integration in your experience with your software? And I just kind of wanted to kick or test myself on, are you thinking about this, right? But in all cases, admittedly, this is a biased sample because this sample starts with counties who have thought about the challenges in front of us and how do you start to piece this together. You might say you get a different answer if you approached it by counties who've chosen not to. So just to be fair, I want to throw that out there. But in all their cases, integration was one of the key reasons that they chose financial software. And the reason that led them to kind of what they're using. And you see words in there that we could debate and pick out over time, but it is the seamless nature that leads to things, but it's also what you'll pick up in some of those words that I try to give you at least paraphrases of best I could describe as folks were talking to me, of how do you provide transparency? How do you get everybody into a single place? How do you get folks to be self-service, even up to and including knowing right where they are with the budget at any point in time? Being able to run their own financial report, like how to be able to do a simple snapshot at any point in time that I don't have to call the accounting department or finance to put together a fancy thing. It's like I ought to be able to just kind of go out to reports and get something that visually helps me. I don't have to be an accountant to use it. Give me a simple pie chart that tells me where I'm spending my money. But those concepts, the specifics don't matter to me yet. What matters is that those are some of the same things we're talking about, like, so go back to the start. You might want to test laying out if one of our goals is department responsibility, self-serve operating model. Like those kind of things start to matter. And so that's where I guess I've been spending a little bit of time to try to piece those together. And again, I can share total reports on each one of those that I've been to. So I know that wasn't where we started here, because really that is ultimately getting into solutions. And I first wanted to make sure we were on the same page in terms of problem identification, definition, and where we trying to go, which was more, go back to the ranking piece. This is what they said. That was a whole lot, so sorry, I probably talked too much.
No. Is there a general agreement, understanding of the vision we're trying to get done, and how, as Mr. Cowan has laid it out, is that what we see? I mean,
And I'm struck by, 2 years ago, and we said, well, let's just take this and do this.
Yeah.
And especially when if things aren't broken, it's hard to support change, and things were going pretty well. But sometimes, what's the book, Good to Great say? Some things, the biggest challenge is when things were going pretty good, that's the enemy of getting even better.
Yep.
And I see a vision here that is taking us where I think we ought to go. And again, in a very slow, and you said collaborative, and then you said also cooperative. And it's going to take a lot of different people working together. And it's going to take some patience and a little bumps in the road along the way, and people willing to give up some things that they haven't really wanted to give up, and some people willing to accept some things that they haven't been willing to accept. But I like it. I like it.
I'd like to say very well laid out. I can't imagine the amount of time and thought that went into what just is in front of us, and so thank you for putting this together. And I don't think there ought to be no doubt of the amount of commitment to get this done from the entire board.
Like any plant, it's the old Mike Tyson, it's a great plant until you get hit in the face with it. Something will happen here. And I wish it was as simple as now that if there's a general vision even that's shared, the steps between there and execution are so long that you have to spend the rest of the year trying to write it down and agree on it. I think that, to me, one of the first ones with your, we're paraphrasing my words kind of, so I appreciate that. If it's collaboration, then I think it starts though with people agree that some of these things are not, they can be led from a single seat, but they cannot be executed, and they probably shouldn't be. Like, I do not have, in my experience, and I don't know, even in our long-term construct, do you really want certain things sitting in certain places? And my examples would be, there was some discussion about this last week, which started with me challenging somebody to tell me define what payroll is. Because I think that without having, this isn't intended to be a decision or even necessarily a full recommendation yet. But if you think about something like payroll and where it sits, I could make I can make an argument, at least with myself, this is what I do at night.
Do you win these arguments, or?
I never know, Melinda. It's great. My record's 0-0. From a books and records perspective, selfishly, I could say from the finance window into that. All I care about is payroll gets recorded in our system of record accurately, timely, and the submissions are made to withholdings, state reporting, federal, like, that's what I care about. I don't want to say this too grossly, but for a fact, I don't care what individual people are paid. I don't view that as my purview, right? Like, now we can debate about where it should be, because somebody should care about it. And I think department heads should be responsible for people. I think that human resources has policies and procedures, and we recognize those policies and procedures lead to things like vacation banks and shift differential calculations, and the complexity mushrooms from there. I'm going to trust and empower and delegate some of those. And so when I think about it, my simpleton, selfish view of that is, if you laid out this big, elaborate process that starts with somebody getting on a schedule, from the schedule they actually work or they don't work, and then they work more or less than they did, and they're tied to one of 6 union contracts, and they're going to be paid differently depending on whether there was a vacation day or whether they wanted to use, right? You keep going and going, and you would drive yourself nuts, because between there and the part that I really care about, which is that journal entry and submission of the holdings, there are a ton of steps. I only care about almost that last one. And I care because I care. But I mean, I gotta focus way over here. So if we're gonna go do something like rip the Band-Aid off the payroll process, I, for discussion purposes in here, color those red, because I think those are largely best led by human resources department. With a mindset that ties back to those pieces that are probably the first 12 steps of a 13-step program or process. That's just an example of when I started to try to think about how do we get this done, and how do I not become the one, and how do I not be, I will never be as much of a subject matter expert in any of the things I just said as people closest to it, is an example. Another example, like John's are more, the treasurers are more clear because we actually pass a physical wall with many of the things related to cash and bank accounts. Like, we actually pass through a door, and so I can define those ones that are treasury owned. Grant management, for example, this is the tail on this one is interesting to me because this one I use my own ignorance with it because I feel like I only know what I know, which is a piece of a process. We've chosen in some cases to run this in a very distributed way through county government. Do we want to pull all those together? Does that really belong? What part of that process belongs in the finance department, for example? I struggle with it because I am not familiar. Happy to get familiar, but I honestly think a lot of that those aren't really best led by finance, and so I identified some of those. If we wanted to start to make progress on these things, the reason I'm belaboring this is when it comes time to put responsibilities, timing down on a piece of paper, and accountabilities, some of these you could run and you could make progress in parallel with them, but probably best done if it's in a distributed work effort kind of a way. So again, I haven't had a chance to test any of those with anybody. So if I offended anybody by the wrong color, this is just for, I'll fire the provocative shot and then love to get feedback. So that makes sense. That's why I went through all of that.
I guess one of my first questions would be just because you used the grant management policy, say, I guess, would software help with that? Because ultimately, what you're saying, the end product is what you're going to be concerned with. So you're going to need to put that budget together for the next year. You're going to need to see that Sheriff's Department got a secondary road patrol grant number, and we're going to want to punch that in, and et cetera.
Where my head goes on this, again, I'm gonna say it, and so I will later be proven wrong if it was just out of ignorance. But I've asked multiple folks, do we even maintain an inventory of all grants? And I've kind of gotten the look like, well, kind of, maybe, I think I know them all. But it's like, I keep going to, show me the list, and show me next, if that list is the grant, and then next to the grant is actions required and dates next to those actions. Like the last thing in that chain is reports filed, like way over on the left.
And-
I think that's where you want to come back to me, but for us.
Well, you and/or that contracted grant writer position, because we need to see that they're bringing in enough grant money to justify, more than we've been getting. Yeah.
The grant management, or the grant management policy, this is the first step. That's why this is in place, because you are our oxygen. That's why grants can't be applied for unless you approve.
Right.
That's step one. Say,
Right.
someone in the campus brings a grant to the board and says, we have this opportunity. Do we have the oxygen from you to apply for this? If you say yes, they get started in the inventory. Boom.
Thank you for that. Yeah, because that's a really important step.
So if we have skipped steps, we lose track. Because we don't know, it has to start with approval, that we can even apply. And then it gets charted and we start.
Yep.
going.
The other thing,
Just a second before we move on,
That's
definitely.
okay.
Deb.
So just as somebody that's done grant management, to Sean's point, I think that, but having an inventory that kind of says, each grant, all of the information, what are the due dates? What are their typical grant processes? What are their priorities that they grant to? Things like the RAP grants or the CAP grants or some of those other things, that if we say these are the 10 to 12 standard grants that we do each year, and then, we have a tracking of that. And then when new ones come in, we can add them to the inventory so the board has an understanding and appreciation for when they are. It also will allow whoever the entity is, if it's administration, then that gives me the ability to say, okay, look, if this grant is coming up or these are coming up in the next quarter, if you're interested in applying, you need to get your information together now, submit that so that finance has a chance to review it, I have a chance to review it, and the board obviously then has a chance to review it once we have.
Especially that
Framework.
time, that calendar piece, because in the past, we've had that, all of a sudden, late agenda item for a grant because we have to approve it tonight because I missed the deadline. We don't want that, so we need that timing piece. We've harped on that. And then the other piece too, and thank you, Kathy, for pointing that out, because it's really important that the board of commissioners is on board with the grant before it's applied for, because for example, the worst one was one we turned down. We actually had a department head apply for something that did not fit Leelanau County at all. They applied for and were granted an award for something, and we said no, and they had to go back and say, oh, sorry, I guess, my board of commissioners didn't want me to do this, and that doesn't look good. So we don't want to do that.
I think grant money has got its purpose and its place. However, sometimes to receive those funds, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and then it becomes an unfunded mandate within your system. Because you've gotten accustomed to that, whatever, that level of funding. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, that grant's dried up. Well, now you're.
Fast Cops, for example. Fast Cops in the 90s, they started out at what percent funding? 80% funding for a police officer.
TUT used to be 75.
Yeah, TNT was 75, yeah.
And-
So it just gradually starts going down.
In the interest of trying to get everything covered in an 11 o'clock deadline, we move on to whatever you'd like else to get covered, including meeting dates, and so.
Okay, let's do it, because I know this is, we really need to read all this
Right.
before we.
We want
I
to,
didn't mean to I didn't know where to start.
no, you're doing great, I just,
Yeah.
Just so I don't lose the one thought on grants.
Yeah.
The other thing related to that, I think, is there's a decision, whether it's conscious or, where we decided that, is that going to be managed centrally or decentrally? And I think the answer to that is yes today, unfortunately.
Yep.
Some departments, that's one of the reasons I don't think we have a full inventory is, and I think there's a desire to, before we jump into things like policies, is how do you want it to work? But to your point, Commissioner.
Yeah. Yeah, please forward. And one of the concerns I have, looking at all this and looking at your current workload and everything going on and all the things that are labeled Q4s, what do you need to get that done?
So, we should wrap. What I was asked for a thought on resources, and I hesitated, honestly, diving too deep there, because first I kind of wanted to get a head nod on, before you talk about resources, is what's the work, and is there a shared vision on doing some of this? I've actually written down some thoughts. I went as far as getting the letter with Darcy, she's in here, on the process for identifying that, but I'm starting just with a skill set and there's a capacity, a skill set, a mindset that goes with that. And I think there is the need for, at least in the interim, an additional body. I think some of this, what Kathy was talking about in terms of redundancy, backup planning, we're clearly exposed on that. We've shown our limits, unfortunately, with an event or two. But what I wanted to do was write that down. But what it sounds like, in my words, are things like, I need help as we start to explore these things that are very gray. It's, you want to explore a personnel module of a piece of software or tool. I need somebody to help me with, okay, so what's our current process? What's our desired process? What are the gaps with that process? Let's talk to a vendor. Every vendor's gonna have the greatest thing in the world, right? Mine does everything. To sort through that. And so those are the kind of things where I could use a little bit of help. And so what my mind is we have ongoing business that we're struggling to support in the current model. And I'm about to go open a can of, on potential change. And I need help on both sides. We need help, I think. And so what's on me is to write down those things. I've done it. I wasn't sure whether to start here, honestly, where I was asked. I know there's a personnel committee, I forget what we call it, personnel committee, where there's potential to discuss that as well. But my thought is step one is kind of define some of the requirements that you'd be looking for within the appropriate structure. I can do that in super short term, like today. So that's where I was wanting to try to go. And that will help dictate the pace of what we can take on, I think, to your question. We definitely need to, as we approach budget finish line, have a thought about how much do we want to take on in terms of potential software kind of costs, technology costs for next year. I haven't had the chance to run between systems, but one of the thoughts here is around how much when you start to think about laying out the rails, which is what I wanted to start with, you know, how much of that shapes who you go to. So those would be the next steps, and I'd love to talk about it further to get some direction. So timing-wise or meeting-wise, you tell me, one of my big asks here is ultimately, I think your time frees up a little bit more, I say that respectfully, and mine would too, is if we get to a thumbs up, thumbs down on a lot of the budget things to be able to kind of move that forward. And we can talk about that at 1 o'clock if that makes sense with the full board.
We do want to set a next meeting date, I think, before we leave here, though.
Mhm. I think we should.
So,
I am here, so.
yeah.
Pick a way.
If it's helpful
How
to
soon?
Sean, I want to do it as soon as we can schedule it.
That's
If
what I was
it's just
gonna
one more thing on your plate, then
Whenever you're ready, I would say, what are you looking, is there a week that's best for you? Do you want to say, I'm not before here and
No,
not?
I think we get here this week, that, or a date next week, for example, that works.
Mhm.
What's the best way to, I don't know how we've done that. We run everything through Laurel, do we?
Typically, I didn't get time this morning, but we'd give you a calendar, to show you what the meeting, what the date, the time, and days are available. I
Is that
can
the one,
have,
Laurel, you brought in? I think you shared one with me.
Print out of.
Yeah, okay.
so I don't have that with me, somebody would like to go get one from the clerk's office.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, other
Can
than,
can you have the calendars for them? They'd like to schedule a meeting, and I know that.
three of
we're
us should know. if we-
I mean, we're right here, I don't think we
They
need to set.
they don't have a date, so that's why, if we can just get one calendar and give it to Sean or myself, and we can figure out.
So Wednesday, we have budget, right? Wednesday at,
So what's left, I believe, Commissioner Lautner, I think we have Wednesday morning, 9:30, and then past there is nothing set.
so you're looking more
Alright.
like at the week of the 16th?
Yeah, I can't do anything the rest of that week. It's, so it'd have to be the following week, the week of the 16th.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's a fair amount of flexibility that week. For
I
me.
think I am too.
I prefer a morning or earlier in the morning or later today for me, but I'm good with.
I'm Thursday of the following week is booked for me. Otherwise, I'm quite flexible.
We want to try Wednesday, what is Wednesday, the 7th or 18th? look like?
18th? I think so.
Does the morning look good
Mhm.
time for the 18th? What time we want to start?
I kind of like these 9:30 myself. Is that too late in the morning for you?
I'm fine with that. 9 is better, but I don't know that.
Okay,
yeah,
I can do 9.
If 9 works, it's.
I may not be available that day due to one of the MPO, the transportation, but
Oh.
it's up to you guys. I mean, I don't think I'm critical to the meeting, but certainly,
Is,
so I don't want to make that anything that's held up. I
Is
just
there-
want you to know that's one that I have, so.
is there Tuesday, is another day where the morning works for you, or?
Wednesday's better than Tuesday for me.
Okay.
Tuesday's Land Bank and Brownfield.
Brownfield,
Oh, okay.
Well, maybe we stick with Wednesday for this one,
Yeah.
and,
yeah, let me see if I
9
can.
o'clock? Do you have your calendar?
I have my own, like me, but
Oh, they're still
I'm
ring.
assuming that the room is open.
Okay.
You wanna do 9 or 9:30?
9 o'clock if it
well,
works.
like 9 if
better
it
for-
works. 9 o'clock on Wednesday, the 18th, correct?
Mhm.
Can I ask, just as a takeaway from this, is there anything that you think would be appropriate? I know we have full board. Is there anything I ought to be sharing just that would be helpful, or are we okay just keep going down the path that we start to lay out today until next Thursday?
I like where we were today, and I think another session to process it would be helpful.
Okay.
I agree.
So what
Commissioner
I'll
Lautner?
do,
Mhm, agree.
I know there's a lot of reading here, but I'll send out, again, the full Raymond report that ties to what I passed out here, so that hopefully it's obvious, the tick and tie, and you can see and open to feedback.
We thinking the same length, the 10:30 or 11 for a finish time next Wednesday?
Mhm. That's fine.
Which one?
Well, let's just, I can play it by ear, I'm good,
Okay.
I'm good all
Yeah,
day.
there's
You know,
nothing after
we-
that.
So just FYI, we don't put an end time on it, it's just
Okay.
a start time.
All right.
The rationale for that is that you'd have to sit here until the meeting was over if we do that, so
Okay.
it's easier to be more flexible.
That was in Butte a while ago, that,
Mhm.
it said times.
Okay.
No, they already picked it. No, they picked it on 8, so 9 o'clock, you have Miles, you can't do the 18th, you have a Miles Kimberly Park Committee here at 9 AM on the 18th.
Could the Miles Kimberly Park Committee meet in conference room 2? It's a small,
They take minutes,
And it has to be on this machine?
it's the only one we have, I mean, you could check with Laurel, she has her own recording equipment, I don't know if she's taking minutes for parks,
She is.
so you'd have to
Well,
check with.
Well, the what?
I think there's the other individual that's taking the minutes.
But I
on the
wonder if she
system.
could hand do minutes.
Yeah.
That is what is on here.
If the clerk
so-
is okay with their hand doing minutes.
Yeah, that's up to Laurel.
Okay.
And, I mean, that's up to Deb and Laurel, and Parks is them.
It's a small group, so.
So I'm sure they could reschedule later by the administrator asking them to reschedule to a later time.
Or we can go later in the day.
Yeah, it says Miles Kimberly Park Committee is all it says on there, so. Right, they don't want to do, they want to do mornings. Okay, so we'll ask Parks and Recs to move.
Or if the clerk is okay with hand minutes.
Well, either way, they're not in here if you are.
Right. Oh, move, I thought you meant move
Yeah,
time.
either
No.
Move from this,
Move
right,
time or
okay,
move location,
okay,
yeah,
correct,
yeah.
Yep, gotcha, okay, perfect.
That's what I meant, they're
Yeah.
gonna move.
All right,
Okay.
they
Okay.
won't mind.
Public comment. Do we have any public comment? Any commissioner comments?
I just have one, and this is to really throw another wrench in Sean's life. I'll be bringing to the full board the possibility of allowing Parks and Recreation. Kim and myself will be bringing forward the thought of allowing us to roll forward our capital budget. Capital outlay, thank you. Because of situations beyond our control, we haven't been able to spend our capital outlay. And we're so limited that we are hoping that we be allowed to move that forward to next year, be able to still accomplish those things we want to accomplish for parks. We can't start all over again with a small capital outlay next year and get anything done. So we were allowed to do this one other year when we had a situation that paralleled the same situation we have here in 2023. It's unusual, but it can work. So that I will be bringing to you.
Other comments?
thank you.
Thank you. Look for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Adjourn. Stapler.